start.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey, hi everyone. Thanks a lot for taking time out. I am Yash Madhva. I'm from Let India Breathe, and this is Voices of India. This is our first live a webinar for under the Voices of India category. You have all seen our previous videos where we bring voices from across the country. Today, coincidentally on World Rivers Day, we have Shripad and Avli here from Manthan, and we are going to talk about inland waterways and how exactly environment friendly they are, and and of course the course, the whole project and the plan has taken in the past whatever the years in the country. And Manthan has been doing some amazing work when it comes to water sources, rivers, and we've all read about them in whatever information we had sent out. Shripad and Avli, hi, welcome again.
Hi.
So,
Hi, Yash. Thank you.
yeah. So Shripad and Avli, I mean, just like a first question to all of you, and of course both of you, and then we'll start. What exactly is a waterway? And we see so many boats, say in Venice and in Dal Lake, or there are other small boats that you see in creeks. So are those the waterways, and why are we against them?
All right. Yash, thanks first of all for this opportunity for us to talk about some of our work and about a topic which I think is going to become increasingly important, because the Inland Waterways is a program launched by the Government of India since the last 3-4 years in a big way. It has been going on earlier, but in a big way, it's just started in recent years. And it's a very major intervention in rivers of our country. So it's a interesting thing which is just emerging. Not many people understand it completely. So, to answer your very question in a very simple way, yes, those are inland waterways, what you mentioned about. I mean, if you just look at the dictionary definition, any inland water body, which can be a river, can be a lake, can be a canal, and any kind of transportation or navigation on that. Generally, it's called a waterway. Rivers are also called waterways, but that's in a different sense. Here, when we are talking about waterways, we are talking about it in terms of, in the sense of like a highway or a road, a means of navigation, a means of transport, a means of travel. So it's in that sense that we are using the word waterway. Otherwise, it's also used for a body of water. And it's inland, so that's how it is different from the marine waterways or what we have, the boats on the sea. Though it is an inland waterway, of course, some of the major waterways, inland waterways, are in the coastal area where the rivers meet the sea, estuarine areas, tidal areas, because the water depth there is normally much higher. So that's very broadly what inland waterways are. And I'm sure anybody who has been to a river or a large lake, even at a tourist spot, would have seen some kind of boats or some kind of vessels plying on it, right from small boats to large barges and steamers and cruises. So that's what waterways are. And I think before we sort of talk about, how do we understand them and all that. And I think one thing also we want to make clear, we are not opposing them. We are not opposing waterways, but we are raising a lot of questions. So we are not opposing or, opposing the whole concept of using water or water bodies for navigation and transport. It has been happening since centuries, and we don't think that it should not be done. But how, why, how, under what circumstances, what is the nature of that use? What should be the waterway? What should the waterways look like? How should they be designed? Those are the kind of questions we are raising. And certainly, yes, the way the program is being pushed by the government today, there are very serious questions, and maybe, yes, some of those we would be opposing, but not waterways as a concept or as an idea itself. So I think with that, what I'll do is, what we have planned is that Avli will make a short presentation, about 15-20 minutes, to mainly give you an idea of what is the waterways program that is being planned now in India, what are some of its key interventions and what are some of the likely impacts, which I think will be useful for us to understand some of the basics, and then we can have a kind of a free discussion on whatever questions people have, whatever comments people have in that. So over to you, Agli. You can make that presentation and talk about some of the basic things about waterways, inland waterways in India. Thanks.
So I'll share the presentation now. I'll share my screen. Just a second. Here we go. All right. Okay.
Awesome, we can see it.
Yeah. So we'll be basically talking about giving you an overview of what National Inland Waterway Project is, what are the key issues, and where we are at in terms of implementation, the implementation of the project. As Shripad sir just said, that for centuries rivers have been used to transport people and goods. Along the rivers, we have seen country crafts of like various sizes, various shapes, which have been used on the rivers to basically transport different sort of goods. Here you can see cattle and people and local boatsmen carrying like everything on the river. And basically this is a national waterway. It's a national waterway 58, but this is not an operationalized national waterway as we want the imagination to be, or the government want the imagination to be. Here it is what a national waterway would look like. This is more than 2,000 tons of coal, which is getting transported on the rivers, basically from Haldia in West Bengal to Pandu Port in Assam via Sundarban and the Indo-Bangladesh Protocol route. Basically giving you some of the chronology of where it all started. It started way back in 1959 or something, where for the first time in the parliament it was discussed that we want rivers to be used as a main mode of transportation. But it was only in 1986 that we established the Inland Waterways Authority of India. Between 1986 to 2014, there were 5 different national waterways which were declared, starting from 1986 to National Waterway 4 and National Waterway 5 in 2008. And with the National Waterways Act 2016, we have basically declared 106 new national waterways over more than 140 rivers, creeks, canals of the country. So now if we look at it, this is how national waterways are spread across 24 states and 2 union territories in India. These are basically, as sir mentioned earlier, these are basically being developed for commercial navigation and shipping purposes. In 2016, it was declared that around 37 national waterways will be developed in the next 3 years. That is by 2019, they should have been developed. Just to give you some of the strategic considerations which are talked about in terms of international connectivity that these waterways provide. So national waterways, National Waterway on Gandak and Kosi will bring connectivity to Nepal through National Waterway 1, and it will connect it to the seaports of Bangladesh. India and Bangladesh are already connected through the Indo-Bangladesh Protocol route, through various, there are like now 10 routes, and some of the new inland routes, Indo-Bangladesh Protocol routes have been recently agreed upon. Similarly, in the northeastern region, you'll see around 19 to 20 national waterways which have been declared, but the main one is National Waterway 2 and National Waterway 16, which is in Barak. It will also gain connectivity through Myanmar. Similarly, in National Waterway 2, we are expecting some connectivity from Bhutan, which will give connectivity to Bhutan with Bangladesh. We'll talk more about it later as we see some of the pilot movements which have happened. But just to tell you about some of the claims that this government has been making with this renewed push to develop and create waterways. Basically, they are claimed to be cost-effective, environment-friendly, and sustainable mode of transport. Why cost-effective and environment-friendly? Basically, bulk commodities. It has been claimed that these are the lowest cost is basically given when we transport bulk commodities through rivers or through water. Similarly, environment friendly. Why? Because if you see ton for ton and mile for mile, you'll have the least amount of fuel which would be consumed. So least energy would be consumed if you want to transport bulk commodities over long distances. But having said that, they're also claimed to be the safest mode of transport for hazardous cargo. But having said that, we want to make the point here that national waterways are not environment friendly or cost effective by themselves. Some of them are not even viable by themselves. Just because there is transportation happening on rivers, it doesn't mean it is going to be, it won't have any impact, any adverse impact on the environment. Other claims of the government for this push was that it will reduce the traffic congestion on roads, it will reduce road accidents, it will help in help gaining employment generation. Just to give you some brief this thing about the basic requirements which are needed to develop and create these waterways. Basically, first and foremost, you need water. Water availability has to be ensured for 300 days in a year if you want to make it really viable. So that has to be ensured through construction of barrages and dams. You need navigation channel, which in case of Indian rivers would have to be created and maintained over time with sufficient depth and width. Basically, the waterways that have been proposed, they basically are of the capacity of 1,000 to 3,000 tons, which means that 2 to 3 meter of depth and 45 to 60 meter of width would be required on average for the development of these navigational channels. And this navigational channel would be built and not built, it would be created or developed with interventions, physical interventions like dredging, bandaling, river straightening, etc., which all have their own share of environmental costs. Similarly, in addition to water availability and navigation channel, you need to develop associated infrastructure like terminals, like storage facilities, approach roads. Now we have fancier and more bigger sort of things which are coming up in the names of freight villages, logistic hubs, vessel repairment complexes, all of these for loading and unloading of cargo and logistic purposes, multimodal terminals. Uh, just to give a sense of what are the environmental and social impacts of the development and to maintain and to operationalize these waterways on the rivers, we have to look at some basic things. So for example, dredging or the excavation of the riverbed, which is required in uh, almost all of the waterways of this country. We need basically the whole sediment or the settled sand will have to be excavated. And this has like really adverse impact on the riverine ecology. It has impacts on the whole morphology of the river. The entire structure of the riverbed is basically changed through this. It also has impacts on turbidity, noise, which basically impact fish population. It impacts the metabolism and navigational capacities of species like gangetic dolphins. It also affects, basically, it also destroys the aquatic habitats, and thereby it impacts the livelihood of fishermen. Uh, we have seen that many of the eco-sensitive regions or protected areas are located on the national waterways. So obviously, when you take a vessel full of oil and carrying bulk coal through all these regions, these will also have a lot of impacts on these regions and these pristine environment. We also have risk of emissions from vessels. We have leakages. We've seen oil spills in the rivers, accidents of fly ash. We have seen bank erosion, loss of mangrove belt, all of the pictures I'll be sharing here. Similarly, the construction of associated infrastructure like jetties, or terminals, basically this also involves a lot of water pollution, air pollution, coal stockpiling, hazardous goods are stored here. So again, there's risk involved. Impacts also include social impacts such as those from land acquisition, relocation of entire fishing sites, fishing villages, restriction on fishing vessels, implications on local livelihood of small boat people, um, of people who basically operate their small boats for tourism purposes. Demolishment and reconstruction of low-lying bridges would be required for vertical clearance. So here we're looking at a picture of dredging which is done. So basically you can see the sand being extracted and being diverted to another channel. So basically you're clearing the navigation channel, but you're putting the accumulated silt and all the pollutants in the other channel of the same river. Here, this is basically from National Waterway 10. You can see due to movement of vessels, continuous movement of vessels through this creek, a lot of mangrove belt has been lost. So this was already an operationalized waterway in coastal Maharashtra, and basically used for the transport of coal and iron ore. But here you can see over time, you have lost the whole mangrove belt. And if you look at other, basically Manthan did a field visit in this creek in 2017 after this was declared as a national waterway. Here, so many people complained that because of this movement of heavy barges, the barge which is there at the starting of this presentation, which is carrying coal, is basically from here. That picture is from here. So basically they were saying that due to movement of heavy barges, maintenance, dredging operations, and pollution due to material handling, which is basically coal and iron ore at ports, there is direct threat to fish and biodiversity of this creek. There are nearly 3,500 fishing boats operational in this creek and 7,000 small fisher people. And these basically struggle with daily battle with barges and dredgers. If you look at these pictures, this is basically a leaf which has coal dust accumulated on it. This is a coal stockpile along the Dharamtar jetty. Sorry. And here you can see a dredger. It's a dredger on standby, but this sort of big intervention, big machine is there on this creek to intervene in the riverine ecology. Now, looking at this report, which was basically done by SIFRI in 2017 on the impact of coal transportation on National Waterway 1, which is now Jalmarg Vikas Project, half funded by the World Bank. Here, only the impact that we are seeing on the fisheries is only evaluated for this 560 kilometer stretch, although this whole waterway is around 1600 kilometer. So here you can see that 65 to 75% of their total income is generated from fishing, and they have reported suspension of fishing operations. They have reported monetary loss due to decrease in fish catch. Similarly, here again, this is from TAG report of 2016, Kerala. Basically, here we can see that fisheries department is basically made to remove the fishing net from National Waterway 3, which is in Kerala. And you're removing the fishing nets, but in place of this thing, you're moving tons and tons of sulfuric acid, phosphoric acid, potash, like all sort of acids are being moved on National Waterway 3, ammonia being the highest one. Now, all these big and adverse sort of environmental impacts we have we are seeing because of these national waterways, and we're also seeing really adverse impacts on the social aspect, also on the livelihood of people. And this basically means that, okay, there's so many impacts, then you must do something about regulating these waterways, right? But if you look at the EIA notification, the actual EIA notification 2006, I'm not even at the draft notification now. Even if you look at the EIA notification, waterways are not mentioned as such, but this notification does mention in item 7E of the schedule, it does mention dredging, ports, breakwater, and harbors, which means for these components, if you're developing the waterway, you need to take environmental clearance. But what we have seen through the correspondence between Ministry of Shipping and Ministry of Environment, we have seen that basically the whole process of environment clearance was circumvented, was evaded for National Waterway 1, which is basically the exemplary project of waterways in India. And the similar dubious sort of exemptions were provided for the multimodal terminal, which is in Varanasi. We can talk more about it, but just for the sake of brevity, I'm touching on like all main issues that we want to raise with these projects. Again, maintenance dredging. So when we talk about dredging, there are like two types of dredgings. One is the capital dredging, which is what you do when you create the navigation channel. But because it's a dynamic medium, sand and silt keeps coming to the river, you need to maintain the navigation channel, and the dredging that you do for that purpose, which is sort of more periodic, is maintenance dredging. But in December 2017, Ministry of Environment was made to give exemption from environment clearance for maintenance dredging in all national waterways. Just to point out, there were other national waterways which were already in the process of getting the ECs. Basically, these were all granted the TORs, the terms of reference, for the preparation of the EIA report. Main being National Waterway 5 in Odisha, National Waterway 4 in Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and National Waterway 53 which is still in the process. But main point being, all these waterways were given the TORs, but dredging and other developmental works are still ongoing without prior EC in so many of the national waterways. So if given exemption to maintenance dredging, several waterways were already in the process of environment clearance. All those processes got stopped because of this exemption which was given to maintenance dredging, because now all the projects are saying that, oh, we are not even doing capital dredging, they're changing things on paper. And whatever clearances were required for capital dredging also, they're also getting away without any sort of regulation. Example being Barak, which mentions in its TPR that capital dredging would be involved, but whole development work is ongoing without any prior clearance. Similarly, if we look at the case being heard in the NGT on the applicability of environment clearance, we've been seeing really sort of, there's no response, there's no sincerity with which this case is being dealt with. Ministry of Environment is supposed to provide report, it's supposed to hold expert consultations, but time and again it just goes without doing any sort of expert consultation. The only expert consultation which happened in this case took place in May 2017, wherein the expert committee headed by Dr. S.R. Vate basically said that all these projects should be included in the environment clearance process, and they should be included as category A projects. But even after expert consultation in the expert committee, all these changes that they said should happen, they have not taken place. Instead, we have gotten draft EIA notification 2020. In this notification, all inland waterway projects basically are included as category B2. Now, category B2 projects do not require any sort of environment impact assessment. They do not require any sort of appraisal. They don't require any sort of public consultation. As I mentioned earlier, that a lot of a lot of ecologically sensitive areas, protected areas, critically polluted stretches are present along the national waterways. They are situated on the national waterways. But because these are included as category B2, these general conditions, which would have otherwise allowed them to be appraised as category B or category A projects, those will not be applicable since they are now under category B2. And only an environment management plan is to be submitted without proper assessment of what the impacts are. And only an EP is to be given within 15 days of the application. Even if you look at the definition of capital dredging, basically river dredging in the river has been excluded, and maintenance dredging is given separate sort of exemption from EC and EP. Now, even after so many, there's a counter narrative which is building for environmental impacts, for social impacts. One would expect that, okay, financial viability would be good for these projects. We have been questioning the viability of the waterways since the very beginning, since they declared all these 106 new national waterways. Now in August 2020, with a new action plan, IWI has basically accepted that 63 of the national waterways which are part of the 106 new national waterways are not even feasible for either cargo or cruise purposes. If you see the remarks, they have basically said that, okay, these are the waterways which do not have cargo, they have no existing cargo, they have no existing depth with which they can develop these waterways, but these were included in the list. So this was all an unnecessary exercise in a way. Only 18 national waterways are feasible with cargo, 25 national waterways feasible only for the tourism potential. 14 operational national waterways in India are operational all over the country, and these waterways are only partly operational, meaning these are only operational in the tidal stretches, as Sir mentioned in the beginning. So ultimately, you're seeing that none of the waterways so far, starting from 1986 to now 2020, we haven't even seen one waterway which is fulfilling its whole purpose, which is giving some financial benefit. Now, if we look at National Waterway 1 and National Waterway 2, these are National Waterway 1 is wholly or partially funded by World Bank. For National Waterway 2, for the modernization of fleet, it is funded by World Bank. Similarly, you can see other waterways which are now getting the approvals from financial committees. But even if we look at these projects and we take like certain aspects of it, we'll find some really concerning sort of issues with them. For example, National Waterway 4, which is being developed on Krishna and Godavari rivers, if you see, one of the main aspect of it was that a lot of the building material for Amravati, the capital city of Amravati, would be transported by National Waterway 4. Now that that project has stopped, what will happen of this waterway which they made operational just for this purpose? There are no definite answers to these questions. Similarly, for Goa waterways, the whole viability depends on one cargo, which is iron ore. If that gets destroyed, or if that doesn't live up to the purpose, what will happen of these waterways is again something that we need to think about. Similarly, Most of the cargo is coming from the waterways of Gujarat and Maharashtra, which are these waterway numbers on Narmada, Tapi, and different rivers in coastal Maharashtra. Most of these are transporting coal. Most of these projects are basically projects which are working on the tidal stretches, and these would be mostly run by private entities. There is no intervention which is planned by IWAI for the next 5 years on these uh, financially viable waterways. If you look at this multimodal terminal, which is part of National Waterway 1, it was inaugurated in November 2018. Now we are looking at its reports in February 2020 and March 3rd, 2020. We see that only three movements have happened so far. One was the inaugural movement, which took place in November 2018. Two more movements have happened on it, and basically it has not lived up to the purpose that it was meant to basically support. The no takers for Varanasi multimodal terminal, this news line and the major status report for this Jalma project basically says. Now, these are some of the pilot movements which have happened on the national waterways. And basically, these pilot movements happen to establish the viability of inland waterways, basically showing their connectivity through National Waterway 2 and the Indo-Bangladesh Protocol route. Now you see that most of the projects, most of these movements are transporting commodities like fly ash, imported coal, uh, Adani Wilmar, products from Coca-Cola, uh, again coal, and here you're transporting stone. And so many of these projects, these movements have been really a hype, because even if you look at this particular movement wherein 1,000 tons of Bhutan stone aggregates are transported from Dhubri to Narayanganj, Dhubri in Assam to Narayanganj in Bangladesh, you will just see that only this much portion of the National Waterway 2 was used. Otherwise, the whole movement from here, it took place through trucks. So basically, you've just utilized this much and said that you're basically establishing viability uh, of the waterways. We have seen time and again through news reports, we've been monitoring this project. So we've seen that either the vessels get stranded because of low depth, because there is not enough water in the navigation channel, or they get stranded because they don't qualify, they can't pass through the bridges which are present, because the flow is too much because of the monsoon. So uh, in both the circumstances, in low water availability, as well as when you have high water availability, the waterways are not working. Here we are looking at these incidents, this series of incidents which basically took place from March 2020, from March 2020 till May 2020. So a series of barges, basically 5 barges carrying fly ash from Kolkata and different clusters of thermal power plants from West Bengal, they have basically capsized in different stretches of the Indo-Bangladesh Protocol route, while carrying fly ash from West Bengal to Bangladesh. If you look at this map, you'll just see that all these incidents have taken place in the vicinity of Sundarban. These incidents have taken place in basically in the wildlife areas, which are really, really pristine, and basically these could really uh, this is one of the major sort of commodity which is getting transported from West Bengal to Bangladesh. 97% of the commodity which is transported between India and Bangladesh is basically fly ash, and this is what is happening there. So just to wrap up, key concerns, I'll say that, okay, they're like really, really adverse environmental impacts due to the interventions which are planned on the rivers, movement of vessels laden with such toxic products, toxic commodities, and construction of terminals, jetties. All these things are really impacting environment, and these could lead to really irreversible changes in the riverine ecosystem. There are going to be really, really huge social impacts due to land acquisition, impacts on local livelihood, impacts on fish workers. And the main cause of concern is that the awareness and the consultation with people, with especially with communities which are most vulnerable due to these impacts, is really low. We are seeing time and again that private interests are being prioritized and not the interest of the local or people whose livelihood is directly dependent on rivers. And again, we are seeing that due to volatile market and capital intensive sort of plans, we're seeing that the financial viability also needs to be re-evaluated, or at least it needs to be questioned as to what is going to be the future of these waterways in the way that they are planned right now. Just to summarize, these are massive interventions in the rivers, and these have large ecological impacts. Uh, these need to be regulated because you're now transporting bulk and hazardous goods through already really polluted sort of stretches of rivers in the country. It is adding to the pollution, and it's not adequately regulated. In terms of the environmental regime, it needs to be categorized as category A project, and social issues remain to be addressed, and the priorities need to favor fish workers, small port operators. At least their concerns, their voices should be heard. Again, the financial viability should be reevaluated. I'll just end here, and we can discuss more in the questions.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Avli. So we, as I mentioned before, we had some questions even before we started, and right from on our say Instagram or within WhatsApp groups and things like that. But of course, even I have some questions after looking at the PPT. So, for example, I mean, it is obviously for both of you. How would you define what is the scale that at which the government is basically ignoring the feedback from local population, and what are those facts that in a way make you believe so? Because of course I have never come across any of these consultation details and things like that, but it's highly possible people are anyways giving feedback. So if you could shed some light on that.
Okay, let me start by responding to that, and Abli can add if she has anything additional. So one thing what we have seen is there is hardly any consultation that has taken place with the local communities. We have visited a number of these places where waterways are being planned or have been operational. And at every place, we have found that most people have no idea about what is being planned, what is happening, what is likely to happen. They have not been informed even about the waterways being proposed, let alone any kind of discussion about the impacts happening. So that is a very, very important kind of thing. And this is the same with not just the local communities, but also even the civil society groups, some of the other social and environmental organizations operating in that area. Most people don't know. There have been some places where consultations have been shown as being done. So for example, for the Ganga waterway, which was basically because it's being funded by the World Bank, I think they need to show some of these things happening. So if you look at some of the reports, they talk about how consultations were held with local communities, with fisher people, with so many other people. Though when we visited the same sites, most people have told us that humko to nahi malum hai ki ye kab hua hai, kya hua hai. But suppose even if we say that those consultations have happened, And the reports actually elaborate the concerns which those people have expressed. And those concerns are all those concerns which Avli has put in the presentation. Fisher people are afraid that they will lose their fishing livelihoods, or that small boatsmen are afraid that their um, livelihood will go, their operations will be affected because they won't be allowed to come into the way of the large barges, so many other impacts. What we find is, even though these concerns seem to have been, wherever these concerns seem to have been expressed, we don't see any reflection of those concerns in the plans. So if fisher people have said that our nets are being destroyed by the boats, which happens all the time, the fishing nets which are laid in the river are being destroyed by the big barges and vessels. We don't see that being considered and anything being planned to be done, except fisher people are not being then allowed to put their nets there. So the problem is that there is no consultation, and wherever there has been some little consultation, the concerns which have been expressed by people have not been taken on board. And the third important point is, wherever even these consultations have happened, they are kind of ad hoc, and one would say at the discretion of the project promoters, uh, because these waterways are not there in the legally binding regime of the EIA notification. If they were there in the legally binding regime of the EIA notification, then the public hearing would have been a legally mandatory part. Even though we know what is the reality of the public hearing in an EIA process, it's often farcical. Enough, enough consideration is not given to that. But for whatever reasons, at least it would have happened as a legally binding part of the process. So it's not really happening, and that's the unfortunate part of it. Yeah.
Avli?
Yeah, as Shripad sir mentioned, we visited like several parts of all these prioritized waterways in Bihar, in Odisha, different creeks, different sort of main waterways, even Garighat, Patna. Now, no people, not even district administrators in certain places, they're just not aware about the program itself, the plans themselves. So how can you talk about some sort of consultation which has happened with them when they're not even aware? There's hardly any consultation. The only consultation that we see on paper, which is present, we see for the Jalmarg Vikas project, which it was a mandate for them to provide with such consultations, to provide such things on paper. That's why it is there probably. Otherwise, we haven't come across. We have really tried and talked to people, tried really to engage with them, but they have not showed that okay, this thing has happened and we know about it.
I see. Yeah. Thanks for that. So someone had asked if we'll be putting this recording online. Yes, it is already available on Let India Breathe Facebook. It is also on Manthan's Facebook. But anyways, we will be putting it out as a YouTube link also. The next question is from Siddharth Agarwal from Viditam. Are there any consequences of the fly ash incidents that have happened, or is it just brushed aside? And how can that be taken up, just in case it has not been taken up already?
Avli, you want to answer that, because we have just had a long sort of reply on the right to information request on that. So Avli, maybe you want to answer that, and I'll add it.
Basically, tried to raise this issue of fly ash incidents which have taken place in different stretches of Hooghly and other rivers and other stretches of the Indo-Bangladesh protocol route, basically in very close vicinity of Sundarban. But from the RTI replies that we have gotten, whatever we could understand from that response, we basically get to know that even the salvage operations, basically salvage operation, they mean that the whole process of taking that barge, that capsized barge, out from the channel. Uh, so these incidents happened from March till May, but till now, like as of 17th of September, we haven't seen any sort of basically salvage operation which has been completed on these incidents. Uh, Other than that, mostly what we have seen is that most of these incidents from the RTI reply that we have gotten, I'm basically telling you from that reply that all of these incidents are basically blamed on foul weather, strong currents. All these things are expected in that particular stretch of the river. How can you blame it on the weather itself? It is the nature of the river. It is your job to basically control the barge, but that hasn't taken place, and nothing on in terms of assessment of what sort of pollution, what is the extent of pollution. No detail is present as such as of now, and it has not been shared with us till now, in spite of we reaching out to different authorities so far.
And the point about this is that this is not a one-off thing. Of course, what we saw was earlier in this year, we saw a series of accidents within 4 or 5, 3 months.
I think, Sripad, you are just going to answer my next question within what you are saying right now.
Okay.
So I'll just interrupt and add it. Because while talking to people about waterways and from whatever news links we had and what events we had, we shared it to people and told, see, this is what happens. These are the kind of things, they don't care, they don't consult, and these accidents happen. So we were told, ये एक दो बार तो होता ही है, road पे भी तो accidents होते हैं, accidents happen on the road also. So these are just one of things. So because I almost saw you answering that, I just wanted to interrupt with that comment.
Sure. So first of all, these are not one-off things. First of all, these are happening on quite a regular basis. So that is what we saw earlier in this year was quite a bunched kind of accident, but we see these accidents happening off and on a fairly regular basis. In fact, we have some RTI replies to that also. So this has been happening. Second is, just because it just happens on the roads and happens anywhere else doesn't mean that the gravity of it is to be brushed aside. The point is that is it really an accident in the sense that we took all the possible precautions and in spite of that it happened? No. In fact, what these accidents actually show is that neither do we have a proper system in place to prevent these things from happening, and even worse, we have no mechanism in terms of a rapid response, in terms of also then a follow-up response after the accident happens. For example, once the accident happens, the first and immediate priority must be that there's hundreds of tons of ash which is there in these barges. It just simply collapses into the river. Now, and the oil and lubricants which are in the barge, they sort of enter into the river. Now, how do you stop the pollution? You must have a team in place there within hours. The local people must be informed within hours. Otherwise, you are not going to have any meaningful response for the immediate pollution. And then you must be able to salvage the capsized vessel out from there within a reasonable amount of time. But what we see is for months, nothing has been happening. So the point is that, and then of course, you don't even have the proper precautionary measures to see that this does not happen. So that is the important issue. Otherwise, of course, we do understand anywhere that you go on road, on air or anything, there always is a chance that something may happen. So that is the problem. The boats are not seaworthy or river worthy. In many cases, the boats are old. There is no proper inspection of the boats. Many of these accidents have happened because there has been a head-on collision. So these are the kind of issues which are there. And then also, I think there is a issue of, if these have been happening, then at least we should also have a kind of a medium-term study of what happens when fly ash like this is dumped into the river. What is the impact on the fish? What is the impact on the biodiversity? Because then we need to assess whether this is really a safe medium to transport fly ash and coal and some of the other more hazardous goods that are being transported. But none of those assessments have happened.
Right. So there, I'll just put it out there for all the participants. We have 5 super interesting questions lined up. So there is no way you can just leave right now. You really miss a lot. Thanks for that question, Siddharth, and thanks a lot, Avli and Sripad. The next one is from Manoj Ji. I'm guessing that's Manoj Mishra. And he's asking, are we going to see lots of NPAs here and along these so-called waterways in due course? And if you're taking that question, either of you, if you could just say even a line about NPAs, it would be great.
So maybe I'll just start with that, and then Avli can add again. So the NPAs, by NPAs, I think this is probably one of the most well-known words in the recent years, but still, because Yash has asked, let me explain. By NPAs, you mean non-performing assets. And this is actually a financial term. It basically means an asset or any investment which is not giving you a regular return that it was expected to give. And in a more specific meaning of the word, what it means is that when a bank or any financial agency has loaned any money, and then it is supposed to get back the that money, that is the principal and also interest on that, and when that interest or the installment is not forthcoming for say a couple of months, or depending upon whatever is the criteria, for some period of time, then it is declared as a non-performing asset. Essentially, it is not in a position asset. And what we have seen is, we have seen non-performing assets across many of the large infrastructure projects, whether it is coal and thermal power plants, whether it is highways. And the reason is, I think the same thing we are going to see happening in the waterways. As the question is yes, the answer is, short answer is yes. Because there has been so much hype created around this waterways, and there's so much talk about all this big investment and so much return and so much potential is there of financial returns, but actually in reality that's not the case. And that's the same reason why we see NPAs in other areas. So let me give you a couple of examples. For example, one place where we are already seeing the NPAs is in Goa, where the waterways have been operating for some time, some years, and now they are also being converted into national waterways. And they were all geared around just one product, that is iron ore, transport of iron ore. Okay. And then when the Supreme Court stopped the mining of iron ore because of the huge environmental problems, the whole industry collapsed. And those barge owners and the barges is basically are now, have become non-performing assets, and they have been put up for sale. So this is the risk factor. You don't have a diversified market, then it cannot work. That is the same thing will happen in Amravati, because the whole waterway was catering only to the transport requirement of the Amravati capital building. But in a more generic thing, I think the hype which has been created around these waterways, where the government is investing thousands of crores of rupees to create the infrastructure, there simply is not that much of a market, we feel, because these waterways essentially are not that viable. To end with one example, the Varanasi terminal, which we have been following ever since the terminal, we visited when the terminal was being constructed in 2017, and then Avli visited it earlier this year, just before the lockdown happened. And it was inaugurated by the Prime Minister with a big kind of a hype more than 2 years back. In 1.5 years since that inauguration, so from the inauguration of the terminal by Prime Minister Modi to just before the lockdown began, it was a period of 1.5 years. The terminal has been built with several hundred crores of expenditure. Total number of ships which have been handled there are 3 in number, just 3. And they had projected that by 2021, some 3 million tons of goods would be handled there. Total goods handled there were 300 tons. And because of that, when the project, when they wanted to actually privatize the terminal, so it was put up as a for bidding for public-private partnership, and some private company was supposed to take it up. The total number of bids received for that, 0. Now the terminal is lying there since a couple of years there, and there is no ship being handled there. And this is the thing which we are definitely going to see across a large number of waterways. Avli, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just the fact that if we read like other committee reports which have basically been which basically say that okay, these waterways are so viable, you're wasting resources if you're not using them. Basically, rivers are there, you're not using it, so it's a waste of the resources which are just lying there. This sort of narrative is basically there for more than, I think, 5 decades. until now, we haven't seen any sort of functional profit giving waterway till now. So I don't know, like, do you want to change the narrative? Do you want to look at the other aspects which are being said by which are the voices which are basically raised by others, or do you just want to maintain that narrative and build on that only? Is basically the question that needs to be asked, I feel.
So I'll just bring forth a comment from Eric Pinto from Goa. He's basically pointing out how there has been sand erosion on the beaches of Goa due to dredging operations in Mormugao port. And this is for all the attendees. Please just Google it. You will find images, you will find maps, and you'll also find how people like Eric and others in Goa have been, fighting about these things. I bring that comment here because I see a linked question. This user's name is BAB. They are saying, even if theoretically possible, how can Project Dolphin and inland waterways coexist? So I would once again want you to, in a line, tell what Project Dolphin is, so that people know why they cannot coexist.
Well, Project Dolphin, I think, is probably he is referring to the project to conserve the Gangetic dolphin, which is found in the several of the Himalayan rivers, not just the Ganga, as the name suggests, but Ganga and several of the tributaries, Brahmaputra, and it is India's national aquatic animal, and it's a very, it's threatened. So there has been a project which has been launched recently, as the Ministry of Environment has claimed, to preserve the Gangetic dolphin. This is something on the lines of Project Tiger or something, may not be that sort of big, but that sort of thing. And of course, Jairam Ramesh, former Environment Minister, has pointed out that this actually launch is a relaunch because they had also launched a project to conserve the Gangetic dolphin. The problem is that the kind of announcement that this government is making, they are making so many contradictory announcements. If you remember that when the NDA government or the Modi government came first in 2014, one of their flagship programs was the Ganga Rejuvenation Program, or the Namami Gange program, which is meant to rejuvenate the Ganga. The problem is, if you want to rejuvenate the Ganga, then you need to ensure that there is flow in the river Ganga, but then you are also simultaneously wanting to build large number of dams in the upper Ganga. You are diverting the flow from the Ganga. You want to conserve the Ganga and its ecology and habitat, but then you are also doing large-scale dredging to run the waterways. Now, these are essentially incompatible programs. In fact, the thing is, one of the biggest impacts of the waterways program will be on the Gangetic dolphin, because the Gangetic dolphin essentially is a blind animal, or a semi-blind, almost blind animal, and it navigates through echolocation, like bats do, by using sound. And what some of the interesting studies have shown is that when dredging happens, then a lot of noise is created. When a vessel or a large barge or a ship moves, then its propellers will create underground sound. And this sound makes it very confusing for the dolphins to understand what is happening, because they are using the sound and the echo to understand where to move, where to find the prey, for mating, for all these things, for locating habitats, and all that is going to lead to much more sort of confusion in their this thing. So big impact is going to be on the dolphins. So unfortunately, these two are really incompatible. I think more broadly, if you talk, then if you're talking about conservation and preservation of the rivers, then you need to look at minimizing the human interventions. You can't have maximizing of the human interventions. And particularly also, it's not just how many human interventions, but the scale. For example, if you're running smaller boats, then probably you don't have to do so much dredging. But if you want to run huge barges, 7-star and 5-star cruises, then you are going to do a lot of dredging. So, right now, on one side, your interventions that are being planned are very large dams, large diversions of water, large waterways, large barges. Then you really can't talk about this kind of programs of, Project Dolphin or Ganga Rejuvenation, Namami Gange. That's the inherent contradiction.
Sure, thanks a lot. We have a few more questions. This one, Tani Alex is asking, how would you see the new Major Ports Authorities Bill 2020 being passed very recently in the context of our conversation here? Any of you, if you'd like to, take that up.
Well, we can add, but we have not actually, at least, we have not studied that new ports bill. If I'm not mistaken, that pertains mainly to the seaports. So I don't, yeah. So but of course there is a link of the waterways to the seaports, because the waterways are supposed to kind of link to this larger Sagarmala project, and which has all this port-led development. So that way the link is there, but we have not studied this specific bill. On a related note, what we would definitely like to point out is that many of these river waterways, the inland waterways, are, they have the river ports. So Varanasi terminal is one example, but the Ganga waterway has terminals at Sahibganj, at Haldia. Some of the other rivers also are having those ports. And unfortunately, those ports will also have a lot of impact. Those ports will require a lot of dredging. But again, they are also out of the whole environmental EIA and environment clearance regime. So definitely for the river ports, what we have studied, we have seen that they will have a lot of impacts and they are out of the legally binding EIA regime. But we have not seen this major ports bill.
Sure. Another question from Manojji. I thought it's linked, that's why I'm bringing it now. Can we compare these with roads or railways, transportations on same route?
Sorry, compare them on the roads and?
Can we compare these with roads or railways, transportations on same routes?
On same routes, yeah.
Yeah.
Avli, you want to respond to that?
I'm not understanding how do you want to compare, like in terms of
okay, let me answer. Maybe then if that is not clear enough, then he can say. So I think the comparison can be in two ways. One is in terms of the viability, in terms of which is a better and a more optimal solution in terms of the costs and other ease of transport. And the other comparison, of course, can be in terms of the impact. So I will say that, see, there is a lot of hype created about how waterways are a much better means of transport and cheaper means of transport. And again, as Avli pointed out, main reason behind that is this claimed fuel, efficiency, that water transport is more fuel efficient, which is true. But the problem is, of course, most of the transport doesn't happen only on water. Most of the transport that happens starts from the point of origin, then you have to take it up to the river, then mount it on a barge or a transport vessel. Then it will be, dropped off at another end of the river. From there, it is picked up and taken somewhere else. So if you look at this whole concept of door-to-door transport, then most of the time water transport does not come out as so much efficient, or even in terms of cost doesn't come out to be much cheaper option, because it involves multiple loading and unloading. It involves other transport which is not as efficient. The water component is very small. So it is only in a very limited context that water transport can be very efficient. Where there is a yeah.
I'm sorry, it just reminds me of this analogy that we keep making about these, metro lines in cities like Mumbai, like how they do not take you from your office to your home. You have to perhaps walk or take a cab or take a bus in the middle and then take another rickshaw to your home. So it's almost,
exactly. It's absolutely the perfect analogy. And that's why the water transport can be useful in a very limited context. There are two contexts in which the water transport can be probably is useful. One is where, the transport is for shorter distances by the local people who are living on the banks of the river, who want to, say, cross from one bank to the other, or go along the banks, but from one point to the other. And that is a very, very important point. And that's where traditionally water transport has been used the maximum. And unfortunately, this whole National Waterways Program completely neglects and bypasses this part. And we have been urging that if you want to push for water transport and inland waterways, focus on this segment. Focus for the water transport, say, which connects villages within 50 kilometers along the line, along the banks of the river, crossing the river, small traders, small goods, small passengers. I think this is what the focus should be. That's where, or in areas like, say, for example, the Northeast, where road transport, rail transport is not so well developed, there it could be a viable transport. But again, for the, local common people, Don't think of a 3,000-ton barge, because there, to just run that one barge, you'll have to have 1,000 crore investment, because you need a big port, you need a big this thing. Whereas for a smaller thing, you can do it much smaller investments, and the need will be served of a much larger number of people. Or in places like Kerala, where there is a lot of water bodies. These are the very specific context in which the water transport can be useful. And in all this context, even if you focus on the smaller people, local traders, common people, then I think it's most effective. And when you compare with the rail and the road, the other point of comparison is that we feel that, oh, it's so much easier to take it through the river because, the river gives a clear path. But then the river is also a very, very ecologically rich system, and you are intervening in that. So I think we need to balance that. So there are multiple places where you need to balance. And unfortunately, that level of study or that depth of analysis is simply not being done for the inland waterways.
That your second last line almost brings me to a question. What if I am in say a city like Mumbai, which has 4 destroyed rivers but not really does not have rivers per se, or if I'm in any city or town which is not surrounded by rivers, why should I care about this? If my livelihood is not affected, if the immediate ecology according to my limited knowledge is not affected, why should I care about even knowing about inland waterways?
Well, I think that, of course, is the general response, de facto response. Nobody will say it, but people generally don't care to what happens in other parts. But as we have seen at the larger level, everything is interconnected, especially the environment. So today, what is happening to one river, which may be 1,000 kilometers from my place, ultimately is going to come and hit me. And also, because if I don't care about what happens in other parts of the country, other people are not going to care as to what is happening in my area. So I think even that, from that point of view, it is very important for us to understand, to care about what is happening elsewhere for both these reasons.
We come across this a lot, what we call the not in my backyard syndrome. So if I don't care about my backyard, if I don't care about someone else's backyard, they won't about mine, and ultimately we will all suffer. There won't be any solidarity in the larger sense. I'll just move to the next question. I just want to go on and on because we have so many questions, but I will also promise this to the participants just in case there are any left. I will make it a point that Shripad answers it on his Twitter and also on his Instagram, and then we will share it.
Yeah, Avli and I will answer. We'll take all the questions and then we will surely put together quick responses. Twitter, I think you are being a little harsh on us. 240 characters, I don't think we can answer everything, but we'll try and answer it maybe kind of a blog piece or something like that.
That'll be the best, actually. A blog will be the best. So sure. This one is from Priyanjali. She's saying, hello, first of all, the PPT was very insightful. My question is directed to all. After listening to the issue, I personally feel that there is a time overrun related to projects that the implementers, consultants are concerned. I am also realizing that there is zero communication covered with the local people. In such a situation, what would be an alternative that you will suggest to overcome the gap between knowledge dissemination of local people and time overrun to ensure reduced project costs? Because I'm trying to understand a middle path, if any. So I would firstly like to interrupt and say this is our effort in trying to make sure more people talk about it, know about it. But obviously this is very limited to people who can access Zoom or Facebook or Instagram and things like that. So I think I'm going to personally talk to 10 more people about this in the next 10 days and let's see how that chain goes. But of course, for the larger question, either of you, please answer it.
Avli, you want to take this and then I can add?
No, sir. You please take this.
Okay. So I think this is, of course, something which is very fundamental to our entire system. I think it's a very structural thing. We are used to the fact that, we can just undertake any kind of projects and activities without talking to the local people. And that is, I think, the structural problem. So, of course, we need to handle it at a much wider level, which means we really need to change completely our whole approach to how we plan and implement our developmental projects. Now, that's a larger question. Given within that, there are smaller things that can be done. So there are two parts. One part is about the communication and how to involve the local communities. I think the most important thing is that the process of consultation and involvement of people who are likely to be directly affected or who are likely to be affected by this kind of project, I think that must be institutionalized. Now that's what partly the EIA notification does by providing for a legally binding public hearing. But that's not enough, because that comes at a fag end when everything has been done, the project has been decided, and it comes more or less like a ritualistic thing. So I think we must institutionalize this process of public consultations, public hearings into this entire process of EIA. In fact, some of our comments which Manthan has sent for the draft EIA notification 2020, we have suggested some of these things in that. For example, why should the EIA be done by a consultant? I mean, you do need experts to prepare the EIA for a project, but we would urge that the EIA must be done together by experts and by local people. So that starts their involvement much earlier in the process. This is just one of the ways of doing it. There are many other things, so I won't go into all the details, but two things. It should be legally binding and must be institutionalized into a legally binding process. The communication with the local people and with other stakeholders, and the kind of consultation that must be institutionalized, and it should come much earlier in the process of project planning. That is one part. Second part is the time and cost overruns. Now, I think time and cost overruns actually come for several reasons. Again, I don't want to go into all of that. But one of the important reasons why it comes is because you propose projects which are these gigantic projects, which involve huge investments, where the returns are not always sure, and so you run into problems. So why do you want to have a waterway which is costing 5,000 crores, where it's going to take so much time? Why don't you propose, which is the Ganga waterway, 5,000 crores and all that? If you say that, okay, we are going to have smaller projects for navigation, which will cater to much smaller needs of local people, those projects would be something which you can do much faster, where the local involvement will be much easier, and you will see those projects happening at a much faster, in a much faster way. So I think that's the key somewhere. I'm not completely ruling out large projects. Okay, maybe there is a time and the need for some large projects. For example, if you want to have a railway connecting Delhi to Bombay, it's a large project. Okay, but those should be far and few between, and those should come, as a overarching thing to a large number of smaller interventions which directly can benefit people in a smaller number of times. So I think it's a much more fundamental approach to how we look at developmental projects altogether. So that's what I would try and say in a very small amount of time. Thanks.
I think I have a one-word question for both of you. For which I expect a one-word answer in yes, no, or maybe. Do you think these large projects are also planned to scare people? It's such a huge project, we can't oppose it. Do you think that's true? Avli?
I think if you use the word confused, that would be a better question. Then I can say yes.
Okay, great.
I think yes. I think yes. Confuse, scare, overwhelm people. I think there's definitely that angle is there.
Great, sure. So we've already in a way overrun a little bit, but I think we can take two more questions. Only if Sripad and Avli agree.
We are fine. We are fine.
Great. So is there a linkage between the energy sector and this push for waterways that is being missed in the mainstream? This question is by Siddharth. And this just makes me think, in an imaginary situation, do you think if there is a solar push happening, or if there is a wind push happening for energy, some lobbies like the waterways might also be opposing that?
So there is a very, very clear link between I'm sorry, just 1 minute. There's some technical glitch at my end. Just give me a minute. Yeah, sorry. So there is a very, very clear link between the energy or electricity generation side and the waterways, and that is through coal generation. A huge part of the waterways essentially is being developed to cater to transport of coal and transport of fly ash. And already if you see together, I was just trying to dig up the statistics, but I think the largest quantity of material being transported on waterways currently is coal, and I think second is fly ash or vice versa. And I think together they constitute more than what? Some 60%, I believe. What is the figure? I think something like that. Or maybe even more. Yeah.
40% is coal and 10% is fly ash. So
yeah. So,
combining them is 50%.
Yeah. So already a huge part of the waterways are actually transporting coal and fly ash. And if you see the projections for some of these waterways, then actually this is the situation that is going to be even further sort of aggravated. So there is a very, very direct link between that. And unfortunately, that also raises the question, what happens if what we are seeing in the energy sector where renewables like solar are becoming much cheaper and the role of coal is reducing sharply, that actually raises a lot of questions for the viability of these waterways, which are then likely to become NPAs, as we talked about. Though I don't know whether that is leading to some of the waterways being opposed or this thing. I don't know whether we can make that link. But certainly there is a very strong link between the development of the waterways and the coal thermal power plants.
So this makes one thing like very certain, that not only in extraction while destroying forests is coal harmful, it is, and not only at the end where thermal power plants in a way irresponsibly dump the waste, but also in between where there is washing and also transportation, we see that this is happening. And so basically a quote unquote environmentally viable and good kind of a transportation like waterways in their sense is feeding environmentally not so good mode of generating electricity.
Not only feeding, in fact, if you see, because so much of the waterways is about coal and fly ash, actually waterways is also surviving on it. So it's both ways. The link is both ways. The waterway project is, in a way, a large part of that is catered to and is going to survive on coal and fly ash transport, which are actually also very environmentally problematic because they are on the water bodies, the ports, the river ports and others which will handle them are going to lead to a lot of pollution.
Right. Okay. So the next one. Yeah, the government of India has taken up National Waterways Project along with interlinking of rivers. Is such kind of project financially feasible? I think the first question has been taken care of, but what would be the environmental impact of interlinking the rivers and then using them for inland waterways?
So I think these are all flights of fancy. The interlinking project is a horrendous project. Just like the waterways, it's largely a flight of fancy with mega projects involving large dams and large transportation and large sort of canals and other links between rivers. And there is a very substantial critique of that, so I won't go into that. But I think if anybody has this idea that the interlinking of rivers then also can be linked to water transport, I think that's really a flight of fancy, because even in the existing rivers we are not able to make these kind of waterways financially viable, financially attractive, especially if you're talking about the bigger projects. As I mentioned already, the waterways, the smaller kind of interventions may be important for local needs, but then if you're talking about that, then this interlinking is a completely antithesis of that.
Right. So thanks. Yeah, so the next one, I would okay, I promise this is the last one because there are many I think 4 or 5 another questions, but in a way I feel they have been answered. And what we'll be doing for the audience once again is we'll be putting out bits from the interview. I'm not saying we'll do it tomorrow, but over the time we will end up putting bits answering some of these questions. So feel free to get back to our Instagram, Facebook, etc., and even a YouTube playlist. I'll take this last question and of course ending notes from you guys if any. So Deepak is asking, sir, I would like to understand the global experience on waterways development for its environmental impact and viability. For instance, during the tunnel making in the road development project in the hilly terrain areas, the way it was made has hampered the ecology a lot. But globally, it seems there are ways and means to make tunnels in eco-friendly manner, but it is costly. Is there any similar case here?
Avli, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, this is probably the most asked question. Like we always get a question on international experience. I would just want to add that see, this is a very sort of how to call it, colonized sort of imagination, because in a way waterways as such were introduced to India by British this thing, with they had sort of elaborate network of canals and they were using it to transport goods, and the similar things were actually in a way um, duplicated in India. But uh, from the 1800s, we have seen that this sort of thing has been tried. But in India, it hasn't worked. And we have codes, we have books, we have proper research on this, which say that, okay, whatever has happened in other countries, you cannot replicate that in India because of the nature of rivers here. The other sort of insight that I want to point to is about all these waterways which are there in other nations. Now you see that there is a growing body of research which is basically hinting at basically redesigning and rethinking the waterways in other countries. In many of the European nations which basically advocated the need and the whole usefulness of waterways for economic transportation. They're basically saying that because of these aging infrastructure, they cannot, and coupled challenges because of climate change and the water scarcity, water pollution. Fresh water is basically a scarce resource. You cannot do these things now. You can like think about all these things in probably in 60s or 70s, but right now this is probably not the time to think about all of these changes and all of these interventions in the rivers, because the whole sustainability we are all at this sort of, we're all trying to deal with this sort of climate crisis and scarcity of water, good quality water that we have right now. And we cannot just do it without thinking about all of these things, is what I would like to end with.
I'll just add a couple of very brief points. So as Avli pointed out, I think one of the major things is that the nature of the river and climate and this thing is completely different in India from some of the other countries where we have seen this kind of large scale water transport evolving, particularly Europe and the US. And we have this monsoon climate, which means that some 70% to 80% of the water flow in the rivers is in the monsoon 3 months or 4 months. The difference in the amount of water availability in the river, the depths which are available, is very big during this monsoon period and the non-monsoon period. Whereas some of the other countries, they have a more uniform water flow regime. And I think that makes a huge difference in the kind of investment you need, the kind of dredging that you need to do in the river. So, you know, there's a very big difference. That is one part. Second part is, of course, even there, we have seen wherever in internationally where waterways has been, inland waterways have been used for many decades, we have seen large impacts on the rivers. And as Avli pointed out, they are now consciously thinking of trying to reverse some of those impacts. So I think that's a important point there also.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. So again, thanks a lot, Avli and Shripad, for coming here and speaking about these issues. And we've touched upon a lot of things. And as you say, how it's not only one river that will be affected in the larger sense, so much more. Similarly, I would like to just bring it forward, if it hasn't come across already, that it's not only waterways that we are talking about here. We are talking about energy, we are talking about economy, we are talking about livelihood, we are talking about forests, obviously. So like the like our say resources are interconnected, like our nature is interconnected, the same are these issues. So I'm really glad we had this holistic discussion. So we have this thing in every webinar or talk. I would like right now personally suggest people to go and visit Manthan's website, right? Because go and read more. Perhaps also ask questions to Sripad and Avli. The email IDs are already in the chat. So if either of you would want to shed light on, say, one or two resources, could be a book, could be a website, could be a blog, could be a YouTuber or a blogger, whatever. If you want people to read, please read or watch or whatever, please go ahead.
Yeah, Ali, you want to share?
I think for navigation and for overall understanding of all these things, I think one should read Sunil Amrit's book Unruly Waters. I'm actually मैं अभी पढ़ ही रही हूँ उसको. I have not finished it, but I really like it. Other than that, we have a lot of updates, and we have also published some stuff on national waterways, the whole projects. Some of our reports are some very basic sort of, for basic understanding, you can refer to those things. And we would like to actually build and further our understanding on the same, if you want to connect with us.
Awesome. Sripad.
Yeah, so I think I would certainly say that Manthan's website you can visit, because we have a whole section on the inland waterways, resources there, which look at waterways, Ganga, Kosi, Ganda, Goa, some of the others. So I think that will be useful. I would also urge you to take a look at the IWAI, Inland Waterways Authorities of India website. They have a lot of documents, and they have a lot of they have the DPRs and feasibility reports of almost all the waterways, which make a lot of interesting reading for what they don't have. So you can have a look at that. I think that's a very good resource. So I think those two things you can have. Books and all, of course, there are a number of them, but I think these two would be a good place to start with. I would also just want to add one thing, that apart from, of course, thanking everybody for giving us this opportunity to share our study. I see that there are a lot of questions which have not been answered. If Yash, you can put together those questions in a Word document and send it to us, we will actually put together answers to that and share that document, for whoever is then interested in looking at those questions. So we could definitely try and do that. Thanks.
Definitely. That thing. We are not going to let you get away without that. And of course, you are more than happy to volunteer. So that's awesome. Yes. So thanks a lot, everyone, for being here. From all the participants to, of course, Sripad, Avli, and big shout out to Neha and Sopicom for enabling this session. And we will obviously, this is going to be forever on Facebook, but we'll also put out better versions of these. And from my end, I would just request all of you to, maybe if not look at, even if you are not from Uttar Pradesh, even if you are in other states, please look at what are these projects that are in and around your places. And it's highly possible you are in one of those states where there is no such plan, which means you will have to then fight for all of them, right? So you can't get away. So thanks a lot. Keep reading and keep interacting with us. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Yash. Yeah, thank you.